take our study. We're not going to let study go because we still need Torah. And I really, really believe that the Torah that is presented to us today, this happens all the time, but maybe because everything is so raw and so intense right now, I'm feeling a little bit more. But that the Torah that's presented to us today has an offering for us, and there's something for us to learn. This Torah portion is, as you all know, because I've come to understand you are well versed in Torah, all of you, this powerful chapter at the end of Jacob's life. Jacob, who is, of course, Israel, which is why I think anything that happens to him speaks to us, the people of Israel, just a little bit more. There is in the verses we're about to look at a lot of reference to holding on to things and also letting go. And when I say things, I'm not so sure if I mean literal things, but again, I think that's also what we're dealing with in our city right now, holding on and letting go to literal things and not metaphor, non-physical things. Um, and I think that there's a lesson in here for us about what really matters, holding on to what really matters and finding a way, though it's never easy, to let go of the things, both the things that matter that we don't have control of, and maybe some things that don't matter so much, and having clarity around that. So I'd love for us to read these verses together, which I'm sure are familiar to many of you, and stop a few times and really focus on some of the language and some of the big ideas. And really with that notion of holding on and letting go. Um, and we'll see if you can uncover some of the lessons. I'm not sure what they are. I just know that they're in there somewhere. But first, let's join together in our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai
Now,
Eloheinu
in
melech haolam
Nohavam,
asher kinshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Donna,
Rabbi,
I
yeah,
see
Rabbi,
you're
I
raising
want,
your hand. Go ahead, Donna.
yeah, there's a temple in Pacific Palisades that wasn't touched by the fire. Everything around was destroyed, but the temple
Right.
is standing. I wanted to say that because
What
everybody can
temple
go.
is what
I
temple would
don't
that
know,
be?
dear, I don't know the
It,
name of it.
it's
I
it's
don't think that's true.
Kehilat Israel. It is very true. It is very
And
true.
I just want to say that because it's everybody can go there for refuge and talk and help one another, and I want to mention that.
Thank you, Donna. And maybe with that extra layer in mind, I mean, it's just another example, and sadly, there are thousands and thousands of examples, but that one hitting particularly close to home in the world of Torah. That question of holding on and letting go, and when we don't even have a choice, when we don't have a choice about it. Suzanne, go ahead.
Susie, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. I don't know if any of you heard this. My daughter, who lives in Seattle, called me last night and asked me if I heard about the woman in Pasadena where the synagogue burned down. And at the beginning of the fire, this woman ran into the synagogue and rescued the Torahs. Did any of you hear that?
I did not hear it.
Okay. I'll do
I-
further research, but it wouldn't have been on the radio at NPR. And my daughter, who's very, very thorough about everything, would not have told me this if it wasn't true.
I have no
Well,
doubt that it was.
we
Sadly, I can tell you, and that synagogue, and then we'll look at the Torah, but that synagogue is they have a clergy team, but they're between senior rabbis right now. They're between rabbis right now. They have a other clergy and senior leadership. But what I know is that Southern California rabbis or I'll say synagogue teams have in recent years become all too acquainted with it. There's like this instinct of knowing that when there's a fire in the area to go and take the Torahs. I can't tell you, every colleague around, it's so awful, has done this. I mean, it's just horrific. Not always when the fire is there though. So,
S-
yeah.
Susie, I'd heard that the Torah scrolls were saved, but the synagogue was destroyed.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's very important. Thank you.
So again, holding on to what matters and
Exactly.
letting go of what doesn't, and coming to, and this really is, with this, we'll turn to the Torah portion. This really is the challenge in this Torah portion of understanding that we don't always have, rarely do we have the choice, or often we don't have the choice to figure out what we're able to hold on to. So we are going to look at uh, Jacob's blessing, again, at the end of his life, his blessing when he brings Joseph, but not just Joseph, Joseph's sons. And we know that Joseph has been living in Egypt and has had his reunion. And I know you've explored some of that with his brothers. But now Jacob brings just Joseph and his sons for their own encounter. So we're going to look at Genesis chapter 48, starting with verse 1 at the beginning of the chapter. If you have the Women's Torah commentary, it's on page 284. Yeah, 200, chapter 1. Yes, 284. And if you have the Plout, it's on page 306. Genesis chapter 28.
48.
40. I'm not sure if you can all hear me. And it sounds like Cindy might be on the phone. Yeah, I'm just gonna mute her. She can unmute when she comes back. Is everybody with us? Okay. Would somebody like to read? We're gonna read maybe the first 5 verses, although I can't promise I'm not gonna interrupt in the way. Does anyone want to read the first 5 verses? Rebecca, go ahead.
I just want to make sure everyone knows that I have the Oxford annotated version.
I was kind of wondering if other people had different versions. Great. So maybe I'm guessing the translation is a little bit different sometimes. And so it'll be interesting to note where those translations are different.
After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took him his two sons.
I'm sorry, what was the translation of your father is what?
Oh,
No.
Your father is ill.
Is ill. Okay.
So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after for an everlasting possession.'"
Great. You want to do one more?
"And now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simon are. And the offspring."
Okay, so stop. Can you oh, were you going to say something or are you still reading? Now I lost you on my screen. Okay, great. So what in particular I'm captivated by that last verse number 5. Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you, shall be mine. So Jacob is talking to Joseph. What strikes you about that? That last part, your sons shall be mine, no Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, no less than Reuben and Simeon and Shimon. Go ahead, Rebecca.
There seems to be some importance with the fact that they're born in Egypt and not in Canaan or Canaan.
Right. Why does it bother to mention that? Any thoughts? Why is that mentioned?
Well, I was reading yesterday that prophecies came to Moses and Joseph and some other person in Egypt. And there's something with the word Mitzrayim that has some kind of significance to bring out such prophecies.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. There's something about that these kids were born in a foreign land, right? They're born in this foreign land. Go ahead, Brad.
And they have an Egyptian mother.
Correct. So what is that? So they have an Egyptian mother. They're born in a foreign land. Their identity could their Jewish, their connection to the people of Israel could very easily be in question. Are they part of this or not? Their mother is not, or their mother is Egyptian, right? And yet here Joseph brings them, excuse me, yeah, Joseph brings them to Jacob. Jacob never imagined that Joseph was alive, let alone that there would be offspring from him. And here they are, these boys, not boys, but right, they're sons, but he's trying to, this is just immediately after this, by the way, is when he pulls the rest of his sons together and he gives them what people like to call blessings, but he kind of tells them, has a moment of honesty with each of them. But first, he's pulling these grandsons together. They get their special time. Mara, you had your hand up.
I was actually going to say the same thing about them being born in Egypt. So,
Oh, okay. Okay.
but thank you.
Sure. So there's also this, this question has been raised a lot. They, not only is he saying they shall be mine, but they shall be mine as much as Reuben and Shimon. So I brought a little bit of commentary. According to the Talmud says that the reason why Jacob appointed both of Joseph's sons as becoming founders of the 12, I didn't mention that. Right. So he's calling and saying they are mine. They're mine as my sons. He's the grandfather. He's not the father. If I don't know about you, but if my parents came and said to me that your children are mine, I mean, there are all sorts of jokes. I'll tell you a joke. Here's a joke for the morning because we need an escape whenever we can get it. Why do grandparents and grandchildren get along so well? They have a common enemy. Just kidding. But if my parents came and said to me, "Oh, your children are mine," I would kind of say, "What about me? Hello." I wouldn't take that so well. But he takes them and he says he's going to take them, and we don't even know what that means, right? The overarching question today is holding on and letting go. We don't know what that means that he's going to take them, but then ultimately what's happening is dividing the land and creating the tribes. And Ephraim and Manasseh get that space along with their uncles, not Joseph. There's no land or tribe of Joseph. It's Ephraim and Manasseh. So it skips a generation. So, okay. The Talmud says the reason why Jacob appointed both of Joseph's sons as becoming founders of the 12 tribes, something he did not promise to any of his other sons, was because Joseph had sustained the whole family during the years of famine. Furthermore, Joseph had been the firstborn of Rachel, who had been his principal wife, aka favorite wife, as opposed to the respective firstborns of Zilpah and Bilhah. And this is where the commentator Hitzkuni picks up. He says that Jacob felt that this was one way he could honor the memory of Rachel versus these other women that he had married or had children with. So maybe it was because of Rachel and that there was something that he had lost Rachel, and this was some way of him holding on to her legacy. His legacy with her was these two boys. Okay. Any other thoughts before we keep reading? All right. So we are on verse 6. And for those who came late, if you're in the Women's Torah Commentary, we're now on page 285.
Hold on.
48, verse 6.
I'm on Zoom now in Torah study.
Oh, okay. Does somebody want to read?
Pretty much the same. I'm gonna call you.
Somebody want to read? Okay, go ahead, Rebecca.
I can continue, and I apologize for mispronunciations.
Oh, there's no apology necessary. These names are, first of all, I mean, that's another conversation is the name, but they're Egyptian names, so no problem.
And the offspring born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. For when I came from Paddan, Rachel, to my sorrow, died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. I buried her there, and on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem.
Right, so he's still mourning her, or he's still in the process of figuring out how to continue on without his Rachel. Okay, and so now we turn to this next part, which is intentionally confounding. So go ahead, maybe just I prepared and then I forgot to print it in color. So okay, I know what we're doing here. You know what? I'm going to read these next few verses because there's some Hebrew I want to look at a little bit. Okay, so verse 8 turns to, he says, noticing Joseph's sons, Israel asked, Mi ele, who are these? Also a strange word. Who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons, whom God has given me here. Bring them to me, he said, that I may bless them. Okay, so now we have this encounter happening, and I want to invite you as I read through this, and I'll read through it in English, but then maybe we'll go back. There's something in the Hebrew. I think there's something in the Hebrew here to look at, to pay attention to, excuse me, because I want you to pay attention to the word, to vision. Actually, it's not even so much about the Hebrew. Pay attention to where sight and vision come into play here. Now, Israel's eyes were dim with age. He could not see. So he brought them close to him and he kissed them and embraced them. There's another linguistic piece here. I said Joseph, but the text doesn't say Joseph. The text says, so he brought them close to him and he kissed them and he embraced them. There is, and I believe this is intentional, something with the pronouns here that's supposed to be confusing. Who brought them? I mean, they're both boys, so that's not the pronoun, but the murkiness between reference to Jacob or Israel and Joseph is very present, and I believe it's intentional. So he brought them close to him and he kissed them and he embraced them. And then Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see you again. And here God has let me see your children as well. So stop there for a moment because the next bit is a whole another thing. What's your take on all of the seeing that's happening here and lack of seeing that's happening here? Any thoughts? Marina, hi.
It reminds me of the episode when when Isaac blessed Jacob. He also had weak eyes, and there was also a substitute between older and younger son. So it
it just mirrors the previous occasion in the Bible.
Exactly. The mirror here, both of these ancestors at the end of their life. I mean, he knows this is the end of his life. So his eyes were weak, he was coming to the end of his life. But there's a key difference here. In this generation, some things change, some things stay the same. In that generation, as you said, it was a swapping of the older for the younger, but that was a trick. He put a fur on his arm to pretend he was his brother. He tricked his father. And yes, and who was the one that did the tricking? It was Jacob. Right? And so now Jacob is now at the end of his life. He's done the tricking to mess with the presumed order. The oldest is supposed to receive the blessing and the inheritance. Jacob tricked to make sure that would get turned around. Now Jacob's at the end of his life, and he is also not able to see, and something else is about to happen with the change of order here. Anything else with the seeing? He acknowledges that he can't see, but he says, and now I get to see you and your children. Mara, go ahead.
What I find curious is verse 10. My translation says, now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. But I wonder why we're being told he could not see. It could easily read, now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, or now he could not see, but we're told both. And so it makes me think there's something more there to understand.
Beautiful. Because what you're saying is why does it list both? It's redundant. Right. And we know the Torah is never redundant. There's always meaning. I think you're 100% correct. So what's the answer? What do you think?
I think
I didn't mean to put you on the spot for anybody.
No, it's fine. I think there's a difference between speaking about how someone understands things due to their age versus the very simple physical ability to see with your eyes. So I think we've got two different kinds of seeing and understanding going on.
Beautiful. And you said it, seeing and understanding. Absolutely. Thank you. Ray, go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, that overlaps with, I don't have anything helpful to offer. I have more of a question to help me sort of parse the nuance of this, may be useful to others also in the group. We, of course, colloquially in English in the 21st century, use the word see about meeting people. Good to see you. Let's see each other soon. Do we have knowledge of Torah era Hebrew to know whether that colloquialism has similar connotations in this word translated as see?
That is helpful because it's a great question. Nothing is coming to mind, but there are many places with that type of colloquialism, nothing comes to mind. I would have to look back to be 100% sure. But where we do know that the Torah comes back over and over with not so much a colloquialism, but exactly what Mara was saying before, that the seeing is not necessary. There are many times where seeing is not about the physical act. Just like, and it's interesting to pay attention that just like there's a lot of reference in the Torah to hearing, and it's not always about the physical act. But seeing in particular in Genesis, because as Marina said, this trickery of that we've seen this before, no pun intended. We've seen this before. But that colloquialism is quite interesting in our world. I've studied this kind of stuff before recently in my prior synagogue with somebody who was blind. And it was so interesting having somebody who was legally blind sitting in the room and then almost automatically using that colloquialism because we don't even think about it. And so there is an intention and a mindset that we're getting drawn into. Now, we need to read the next few verses because this understanding for what it is that his inability to see has its impact. And so we're going to see how it has its impact. See, I just did it. We're going to see. We will discover more about its impact in the next few verses. Before we go on, though, he says, my eyes are dim, I can't see. And then go to verse 11, just again, I never expected to see you again. So he's using that. So there's your answer, Ray. He's using it. That colloquialism. I never expected to see you again, but he just said he can't see.
Yeah, and it's certainly, sorry to interrupt, easy for us to infer a colloquialism that is familiar to our own accustomed use. And, I always try to remember to be cautious in being aware of our own perspectives and even good faith accidental understandings of language and colloquialism, because it's very easy to just project our own way of using this language into these figures, and that may or may not be valid. So I can both see it being a valid reading that, oh yeah, this colloquialism goes way back to Israel's time, or wondering, does he mean it in our sense? And I find no path to a ready answer, but I think the question at least slows us down enough maybe to be helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you so much. There is a certain acknowledgement here that the word is being used, and we do see this, that the word lirot in Hebrew, that's the Hebrew, is used with some sort of understanding around awareness or knowing, right? Knowing, right? And you could retranslate that. It's not exact. There's no perfect translation. I never expected to know you again. And here God has let me to know your children as well. Again, it's not a perfect parallel, but that fits into the puzzle. Rebecca, go ahead.
I'm also wondering if by saying I cannot see, it's acknowledging a certain sense of imperfection. I'm not perfect anymore, or maybe I never was perfect, and now I'm really having difficulty.
Maybe, well, and I know, and this comes up in other places, that the seeing is about imperfection. Maybe it's about really understanding and having control. When you can see the land, I don't know about you, but I haven't turned on local news for years. And over the last 3 days, I can't turn it off because I just want the best view. I feel like if I can get a view of the entire fire zone and I can get the right perspective where I can understand where they're panning, then it makes me feel more in control, which is completely illogical. But there's something, I think, to that. And perhaps Israel's doing the same thing here. Merle, go ahead.
Also, I'm thinking that we often say, I see what you're saying,
Yes.
which to me brings in what you just said about understanding. that you're getting it in some way or another.
Right. Incidentally, I don't want to, we could spend the rest of we don't have very much time left, but we could spend the rest of the time just going down on this, but I want to go to the rest of the next few verses. But it is worth mentioning that when the moment of revelation happens in Exodus at Mount Sinai, we hear that same word. There was light, you could see the thunder, right? I mean, it comes back over and over in a way that, like Mara said, the Torah is very clear. This is not just about physical eyesight. There's something more to it. And I think for our purpose today, given our what's going on around us, perhaps there is something about being able to have full understanding and or control of what's going on. Okay, so this is the lead up. Verse 12, this is the big choreography that gets confused as well. Does somebody want to read starting with verse 12? Okay, go ahead, Rebecca.
Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand upon the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn.
Okay, so stop there for a second. To get the choreography straight, every year I have to remind myself. So the older Ephraim should, see, this is confusing on Zoom. I didn't mirror my screen. It should be on the right. And Manasseh is the younger one on the left. And again, this comes back to did I get that backwards? Okay.
Yeah, Menashe is the older one. Ephraim is the younger one.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that way, right? So, and he confused it. But again, when did we see this before? We just said this. This older and younger switching happened a generation earlier with when Isaac was the one that was old, right? And Jacob and Esau. So Jacob lived through this already, but last time Jacob was the one who, with some help from mom, was the one who was making this happen. And now he is the one who's in the position of having control of the order and the blessing. And he's doing this and he's turning it around. Okay, go ahead.
And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has led me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and in them let my name be perpetuated, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth."
Great, thank you. If we go back to verse 15, does anything strike you as unusual about verse 15? Marina, go ahead.
Yes, I was going to ask you about it because he's blessing Joseph's sons. He's holding his hands on their heads. But this says he blessed Joseph, saying.
Right. Thank you. That's exactly where I was going. What conclusion can we draw from that?
He's blessing the whole family, the beginning and the continuation. He's blessing all of Joseph's descendants through his sons.
Right. Now you're Joseph. How do you feel about this?
proud, mixed, confused?
Exactly. All of the above, right? As a parent, you want your children to have all the blessing in the world. But wait a minute. They are they getting the blessing? If he's blessing Joseph, he should bless Joseph. If he's blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, he should bless Ephraim and Manasseh. But the blessing is physically to Ephraim and Manasseh, but being claimed that it is Joseph's blessing. Go ahead. I don't know if it's Harv or Mara. Go ahead, Harv.
Harv, I've got a question. Does this passage lead to the fact that Joseph is really not one of the people we use in prayer? We use Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but we never mention Joseph as a patriarch. Does this passage have anything to do with that, or is there some other reason? That's my question.
That's a great question. I've never really thought about it that way. We stop at Jacob's generation when we say this, right? But then where is the blessing in the next generation really plays out in terms of land holdings, right? It goes because we are transitioning now, and at the end of this afternoon, we move to the book of Exodus. So where it is about the nation growing. So it transitions in that generation. But what's interesting with the land holdings is, and the tribes, is that Joseph doesn't get one. It is his sons who get it. It's his brothers and his sons. Ray, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm struck in this whole passage and looking back to verse 12 and all the way through the verse that we're looking at right now, how the narrative weaves in and out of more objective language, exposition, and more commentary language, either providing things from without the scene, apparently for context, which don't necessarily constitute opinion. But then suddenly I find that saying bless Joseph represents an opinion from someplace outside of the episode. So verse 12, Joseph then removed them from his knees, etc. This is all choreography. This is objective. Took the two of them, right hand, etc. Objective. And then we start to get commentary when it says in this translation, though Manasseh was the firstborn, or though Ephraim was the younger. So that's not opinion, but it is representing a perspective to introduce it into this narrative. And then it ups the stakes when it says, verse 15, he then blessed Joseph. Says who? Why is this blessing Joseph? That at the minimum is an interpretation of what is happening. But unless there's a studio audience sign next to the applause sign that says, now the blessing of Joseph, why do we think he blessed Joseph? Who's telling us this?
And this is the question for all of us to wrestle with. Many of the commentators tell us that the answer is very simple, that when Joseph's sons are blessed, a parent's love, that is his blessing. What else would a parent need? And a case can be made for that. That's what a lot of the commentaries say. Again, I think there's something in here about how much we hold on to and how much we let go of, both in this case for Joseph as the next generation, and I don't want to give away too much, although it happens in the next chapter. Joseph's going to die very soon as well. But first Jacob dies, right? So as the next generation, he is holding on to or letting go of his need to be a landholder, right? And to have that blessing, but also making sure that his sons, I mean, what did he go through to have these sons who were born to an Egyptian mother, never knew that they had an Israelite family or grandfather still have enough connection to the Jewish people that they could have this blessing. And incidentally, for those who don't know, this is the prototype for the parents' prayer that's said around a Shabbat dinner table. May you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. What a strange thing for us to have. This is when we hear about them. Why doesn't it say, may you be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Joseph? No, it says be like Ephraim and Manasseh. There's a lot that we don't fully understand, but there's something to the power of these boys who were raised by their father and mother and are able to hold on to their connection to the Jewish people, even though it has been challenged by every measurable standard. I mean, they didn't know that it existed and they lived in Egypt. Okay. Donna, I see your hand very quickly, and then I want to see if we can make some sense out of this. Go ahead, Donna.
I don't know if I can do this quickly, but I found out just a few years ago, that I was the firstborn, and we have to talk later about inheritance with girls. But this is so interesting. Thank you for the study. I appreciate it. And then on my dad's side, British Jews. But I want to listen to what you're going to say, because there's a stranger in a strange land. Joseph comes into Egypt. Then he marries Pharaoh's daughter. And I think God wants us to see about how he forgave his brothers, how God brought him into Egypt, how Jacob comes here, and God preserves the Jewish people. There's so many lessons in this story that are so profound about how we forgive and we give back, and then the children get the land. It's interesting. It's just really interesting.
It is very interesting. And this is the end of the book of Genesis. So this is the end of the narrative of the family. This is where it comes to an end. And I want to share with you one other piece. This is one of my favorite midrashim that gets connected to this Torah portion, because, of course, Jacob is on his deathbed. And here he is with Joseph and his sons. And then in the next chapter, he pulls all the other sons together. We won't talk about the fact that he doesn't bother with Dinah, but that's okay. Different story. And he is concerned, Jacob, and this goes back to the overarching question of holding on and letting go, and what we can control and what we can't, and what matters and what doesn't matter. This midrash, which may be familiar to some, has Joseph on his deathbed, and he's so concerned. The one thing that matters the most to him is that this line, this heritage, this covenant will carry on to the next generations. That's the thing that matters more than anything else in the world. And when he's going to die, and he knows he's going to die, has no more control over that. But that's what matters. And in the midrash, the sons are gathered around, and they say, this is the rabbis did this masterful work of bringing different texts together. They say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And I don't know if this is familiar, you can nod. We know the Shema, but they understand it in a different way. Listen up, Israel, Jacob. Listen up, Dad. You don't need to be so worried. Why? Because Adonai is our God. Adonai is one. So they say that the Shema is the son's answer to Jacob's concern about losing control. And then Jacob, and this is why one of the explanations for why we whisper the second line of the Shema, Jacob, as he's dying, says, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Blessed is God's name forever and ever. And by the way, that second line does not appear in the Shema. It's the first line. So this midrash is saying, oh, thank God. That's Jacob's response. Thank God I don't have to worry about the future of the Jewish people, of this covenant, because that's what really matters. So, Midrash. Any very quickly, and I am so sorry we ran a little bit late because I know we're going to end with Kaddish, but I think it's really important to come back to what does this say to us while our city is burning and people on the Zoom have lost homes? Control, holding on, letting go, and having clarity around it. I'll offer something. I'll offer something, and that is that it is human nature to hold on, to want to hold on to life and to pass the things that really matter to the generations that follow and to make sure that they live on. And I think it's also human nature that having clarity around that vision, that seeing, is a lifelong process. What really matters? As homes are burning, we can still hold on to what really matters, but it's not easy. It has never been easy. Merle, go ahead.
I grew up in a neighborhood in LA that was always on fire in Benedict Canyon. And I remember the first time, I think I was in middle school, and we had to evacuate. And my mother and I just went running. We were evacuating to my grandparents who lived in Park La Brea. But my father was grabbing suits. And we were like, why? He said, I'm a doctor. I have to take care of these people and I have to go to work tomorrow. You can go someplace and buy some new clothes. And that is what the clarity to this day reminds me of, that he was being clear where my mother and I were just running out of the house. And why was he taking everything with him that he could grab before they shoved us out of the neighborhood? But he grabbed what he needed to survive the next day.
Wow, amazing. And what felt important to him didn't make any sense to you, right? And so also I think
at first, afterwards,
until you paid attention to him.
Right. At what, and I was young enough that it made no sense to me. But then the next morning, we were both, and my grandparents were clearer because we knew where he was going and what he was doing.
So we need to hear each other, pay attention to each other, and understand that what's important to one person isn't necessarily the same. And who are we to judge? Susie, were you going to say something?
I think she's muted.
Oh, I couldn't see that you were talking. Go ahead. You need to unmute.
You can hear me now, right?
Yep, go ahead.
It's very relative and general to say you can let something go, and the importance of it is to each person is so different. If you have your house and it's suddenly gone and you have everything invested in it. It was a man just from Pacific Palisades who grew up there. His father grew up there. Don't know if you saw his interview. And today his wife is having a baby. And the day the fire began was the day right after they finished the nursery for the baby. And how do you say to that person, you have to let go? You have to let go. I think that I don't know how to say it. It's different for everybody. It's just,
exactly.
I don't know what I would do if I was in a situation like that. I don't know if I could let go.
It's absolutely horrific. And sometimes, often, as we're being reminded, we are not ultimately in control. And that is another thing that we have to be able to to live with, and it's we're living through an impossible situation, and we will get through it. We will get through it. Part of the reason is we have each other. Part of the reason is that, and that matters. And we also have our tradition. And as we said in services last night, and worth repeating here, we come to the end of Genesis. And so what do we say at the end of any book? Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Be strong, be strong. And we will be strengthened. We will find strength in our Torah, and from each other. So with that, I want to, I'm going to read the names, our Shloshim list, those who have died in the last month, and then ask if there's anybody here who's observing yahrzeit. But let's start by making sure that we bring into this space all those in our community who've died in the last month. Jerry Browerman, Saul Galper, Sandra Gelfand, Herb Glazer, Roland Karjanjian, Barbara Levin, Mark Michel, Myrtle Pinsky, Sandra Romick, Gidi Savis, Richard Sayers, and Ralph Julius Stern. Are there others that we should add?
Rosa Hersher.
Thank you. Okay, let's join together in Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlith malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam umei omaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitpaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudisha b'riku le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata b'nechamata da'amiran be'oma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shleim Rabbanim v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom Rama, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the source of strength bring strength to all who need it. Amen.
Amen.
I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and just stay safe, hold on to the things that really matter, and
Thank
just
you.
stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you,
power.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Shabbat
Shalom.
shalom.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom. Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.
Oh, man.